Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're going to crack open a fascinating case file from the early days of psychiatry, a real detective story of the mind, from none other than Carl Jung.
And let's just start with the big question, the one that sits at the very heart of this entire investigation. Can you pretend to be insane so convincingly that the act becomes real?
So Jung kicks things off by pointing out a huge problem. He says that telling a brilliant actor from a genuinely sick person is, and I'm paraphrasing here, one of the absolute hardest jobs in psychiatry. There's no easy way to do it.
And this quote from Jung himself really hits the nail on the head. He's basically saying, look, we don't have some magical test for this. It really comes down to the doctor's gut feeling, their intuition, and just watching the person very, very carefully over a long period of time.
Now here's where it gets really, really interesting. Jung throws in a major twist. He says the kind of person who's most likely to even try to fake insanity often isn't totally stable to begin with. They might have what he called a hysterical disposition, meaning they're already kind of primed for their own minds to play tricks on them.
So that leads to the next logical question, right? If this is such a difficult thing to pull off, who on earth is actually good at it? Well, Jung started to see a specific profile emerge.
He noticed a really clear difference. He said, sure, most criminals lie, but their lies are often kind of clunky and obvious. Thieves, though, they are on a whole other level. For them, lying isn't just a tool they use, it's practically second nature, almost an art form.
And to really hammer this home, Jung brought in this quote from a criminologist named Krauss. Think about this. For these people, the line between what's true and what's made up has gotten so blurry, they start to believe their own fabrications. They don't even know they're lying anymore.
And this wasn't just a hunch. Jung looked at his own data from his work at the famous Burke-Holtzley Asylum, and bam, the numbers backed it up. A whopping 73%, nearly 3/4 of the people he studied for faking insanity were there for things like theft, swindling, or embezzlement. The profile was a dead ringer.
Okay, so with all that background, let's get to the main event. We're going to look at the case that put all of this to the test. The truly bizarre, perplexing story of a man we'll just call Patient J.
And you guessed it, Jay was a textbook example of this profile. He was a repeat offender, couldn't hold down a job, a history of theft. He even told the doctors he was driven by this constant inner unrest that just wouldn't let him settle down, pushing him from one bad decision to the next.
So Jay gets arrested one last time, and this is where the performance begins. At first, it's these little, almost comically senseless acts. He's given a matchbox, and he tries to pry it open from the side, like he's completely forgotten how it works.
And the act continues. He's told to lock a door, and he just stands there, persistently trying to jam the key into the lock upside down. It's a classic, over-the-top performance of someone who's completely lost their marbles.
But then things take a turn. This isn't just simple acting anymore. He's left alone in a room and he just stands there, stock still for an hour and a half, and then he suddenly goes pale, starts sweating, and just collapses in a genuine faint. That's a real physiological reaction. You can't just decide to do that.
And from there, it gets even more alarming. Out of nowhere, he launches himself headfirst into a solid door with so much force that the head warder thought the whole building was falling apart. This was not a theatrical gesture. This was a dangerous, seemingly uncontrolled act of self-harm.
So you can imagine the dilemma for Jung and his team, right? You've got this massive question hanging in the air. Where does the act end and the real illness begin? Is this guy an Oscar-worthy actor, or has the role he's playing literally taken over his mind?
And this is where Jung's genius really comes into play. To solve this puzzle, he developed this incredible theory about how a conscious, deliberate lie can, under the right pressure, actually become an unconscious, involuntary reality.
He laid out this 4-step process. It starts with an intense emotion, a powerful affect, like the absolute terror of going to prison. That triggers the conscious decision to start faking. But then your attention gets so completely fixated on playing this role that the performance just kind of slips into the subconscious. It goes on autopilot.
The core concept here is something called auto-suggestion. It's basically like hypnotizing yourself. By focusing on the idea of being insane with so much intense emotion and concentration, you essentially command your own mind and body to believe it's true.
And Jung's own words really sum it up perfectly. He says, "I see our patient as a malingerer whose malingering worked only too well." In other words, he started out as a faker,
But his performance was so good, so successful, that it actually convinced his own subconscious mind. The actor became the part. So, armed with this theory of autosuggestion, we can finally make sense of Jung's final and really nuanced verdict on patient J.
See, Jay did eventually confess to the act, but when they examined him after he confessed, they found real damage. He had actual, verifiable gaps in his memory from that time. His perception was warped, his attention and concentration were shot even after he'd given up the game. These were real deficits he could not have been faking.
And this led to a pretty incredible medical and legal conclusion. For the original theft, the crime he committed when his mind was clear, Jung said, yep, fully responsible. But for the simulation that followed, an act born out of pure panic that spiraled out of his control, he was only partially responsible.
So, what's the big takeaway here? It's that the line we like to draw between a conscious lie and an unconscious illness, it isn't a solid brick wall. It's more like a thin, permeable screen. And when you put it under enough emotional pressure, a conscious choice can seep right through and unleash things that are no longer in your control.
And that leaves us with one final, kind of unsettling question to chew on. If a lie is experienced with the full force of truth, if it produces real physical symptoms, real memory loss, at what point does it stop being a lie? What really is the difference?